You stand in a world where effort is treated like a currency, attention is traded like a commodity, and emotional labor is quietly taxed without consent. You keep giving, hoping the world will eventually run a fair accounting system. But the math keeps breaking in the same direction. The more you offer, the less it seems to matter. The more available you are, the more invisible you become. You show up early, stay late, reply fast, tolerate more than you should, yet nothing balances. Now forget whatever you're dealing with today. Let's walk through the truth together. You keep believing people are taking you for granted, but the truth is more uncomfortable. You are the one training them to do it. Not because you're weak, but because you've convinced yourself you can handle being undervalued. You treat your time like a clearance shelf item, heavily discounted, easily accessible, no questions asked. You give and give as if generosity has no cost, as if availability doesn't drain you, as if self-sacrifice somehow increases your worth. But in any economy, emotional or financial, oversupply annihilates value. And you've been oversupplying yourself. This is where the inflation effect begins. When something is always available, it becomes background noise. You become the never-ending vending machine that never runs out of snacks, no matter how much someone presses the buttons. It's not cruelty, it's conditioning. People stop noticing your effort because you've taught them there's no limit. They assume you don't need rest, consideration, or reciprocity because you never ask for any. You normalize the imbalance by pretending it doesn't hurt, but it does. And deep down, you know it. You didn't end up here because people are malicious. You ended up here because you overestimated your capacity and underestimated your humanity. You told yourself that good people don't keep score. But even your subconscious keeps receipts. The quiet resentment you feel isn't proof that others are selfish. It's proof that you've ignored your own needs long enough to forget where your boundaries even were. You think you're being selfless, but what you're doing is emotional hoarding, piling responsibility onto yourself because letting someone else handle it feels unsafe. You refuse to say no, not out of integrity, but out of fear. Fear of disrupting the peace, fear of disappointing someone, fear of looking like a burden. So you become the burden to yourself instead. Here's the irony. The people you serve the most often understand you the least, because you hide your exhaustion behind competence. You hide your frustration behind politeness. You hide your limits behind silence. When you make everything look easy, people believe you. They assume your emotional energy regenerates automatically, like a phone you never have to plug in. This is how self-worth erosion begins, quietly, gradually, almost politely. You reduce yourself piece by piece, thinking it will make relationships smoother, workplaces calmer, friendships stronger. But what you're really doing is shrinking your own life, so others can move freely in it. And they will. Not because they're cruel, but because humans respond to incentives more reliably than intentions. If you reward neglect with more effort, you get more neglect. If you reward inconsideration with understanding, you get more inconsideration. If you reward distance with closeness, you get more distance. You are not being taken for granted. You've been giving people a blueprint for how to undervalue you. Word by word, gesture by gesture, silence by silence. You've been teaching them that your boundaries are optional, that your needs are negotiable, that your feelings are elastic, that your time is free. And the tragedy is that you didn't do any of this because you hate yourself. You did it because you hoped someone would finally treat you the way you've been treating them. But that's not how emotional economics works. Value rises when it is protected, not when it is poured out endlessly. You don't notice the moment your boundaries evaporate. It never happens with an explosion. It happens with a soft, almost imperceptible bending, the kind you tell yourself is temporary, reasonable, situational. But every time you bend, you make it easier to bend again. And eventually, you wake up realizing you're no longer living your life. You're maintaining everyone else's comfort. That's the problem with invisible contracts. You keep signing them without knowing you did. Every "sure, I can do that," every "don't worry about it," every "it's fine" becomes another clause you agree to. You don't say these words because you're generous. You say them because you fear what will happen if you don't. You fear being the difficult one, the selfish one, the person who disrupts the social harmony everyone claims to value but rarely practices. So you adopt a survival strategy. You become the flexible one, the understanding one, the person who can take it. But the more you take, the more others assume you're built to absorb the emotional debt they don't want to carry. This is where the emotional economy starts collapsing. You think you're investing in a future return, affection, loyalty, respect, gratitude. But these returns only come when the system is balanced. Yours isn't. You're pouring in effort while pretending it doesn't cost you anything, and the world believes you. So instead of reciprocity, you get extraction. Instead of acknowledgement, you get expectation. Instead of appreciation, you get entitlement. And here's the paradox. The more you try to keep peace by avoiding conflict, the more conflict you create inside yourself. You swallow your disappointment until it mutates into resentment. You silence your needs until they sound like weakness. You let small things slide until they become big enough to crush your sense of self. People don't see your erosion because erosion is slow. Tiny grains of self-respect washed away each time you prioritize someone else's comfort over your own. You start doubting your right to say no. You start over-explaining your decisions like a defendant trying to justify existing. You apologize for taking up space, for needing time, for feeling tired, for having limits. This is boundary collapse, and it's not dramatic. It's subtle, it's bureaucratic. It's 1,000 tiny approvals you never meant to give. Look at workplace culture for a moment. You do the extra tasks no one else wants, not out of passion, but out of fear of disappointing your manager. You respond to late-night messages because you don't want to seem uncommitted. You stay longer, work harder, smile wider, until the workload you should have shared becomes the workload you're expected to absorb. No one stole your boundaries. You handed them over with a corporate smile bow. And when someone finally crosses a line you never defined, you blame them. But they didn't cross your boundary. They crossed your silence. This is the gratitude paradox in action. You think your kindness will earn appreciation. Instead, it deletes itself from their awareness. Humans adapt to consistency faster than they express gratitude. What was once generosity becomes normal. What was once a favor becomes routine. What was once exceptional becomes invisible. Eventually, you start believing that maybe your value really is measured by how much inconvenience you can endure. Maybe you're only lovable when you're useful. Maybe your worth is negotiable. And in that quiet internal negotiation, you always price yourself too low. But here's the truth. Boundaries don't keep others out. Boundaries keep you in. They keep you from dissolving into other people's expectations. They keep you from becoming a shadow of their convenience. They keep you from forgetting that you, too, are a person with needs, limits, and a life that deserves structure. Yet you avoid setting them because confrontation feels like danger. You confuse stating your needs with inviting conflict. You think holding a line makes you harsh. But holding a line makes you visible. It makes your value measurable. It makes your emotional labor something others can no longer consume without noticing. Without boundaries, relationships become extraction sites. With boundaries, relationships become exchanges. And you deserve an exchange, not a drain. This isn't about controlling others. It's about refusing to keep abandoning yourself. You rarely notice when the economics of your self-respect begin to collapse. It doesn't happen with a dramatic realization. It happens the same way a gym membership drains your bank account when you stop going. Slowly, invisibly, while you tell yourself it's not that serious. You trade pieces of yourself for small doses of approval, hoping the exchange rate will eventually improve. But in emotional economics, trading self-respect for acceptance is like trading gold for coupons. The return is always worse. You don't set explicit terms for how others should treat you. Instead, you rely on silent hope, as if hope were a currency that could hold value in a market built on convenience. Every time you say yes when you want to say no, you dilute your worth. Every time you tolerate behavior that dents your dignity, you lower your market price. The inflation effect kicks in like a quiet algorithm. The more of yourself you give freely, the less anyone feels the need to earn your presence. Self-betrayal becomes routine. You catch yourself explaining why someone's mistreatment isn't that bad. You rationalize emotional imbalances the way sunk-cost investors justify staying in a failing project. I've put so much into this. I can't walk away now. You forget that sunk cost never justifies future investment, not in finance and not in your life. But you keep pouring in anyway, because leaving would force you to admit how much you've already lost. This is how self-deception loops form. You convince yourself you're being patient when you're actually postponing the inevitable. You tell yourself you're being understanding when you're simply avoiding the discomfort of asserting your needs. You call it empathy, maturity, compassion. But deep down, it's fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of being disliked. Fear of disrupting the fragile balance you've been maintaining with duct tape and self-neglect. And that fear is expensive, more expensive than any boundary you're afraid to set. Look at your relationships. You teach people they don't have to reciprocate because you'll show up whether they do or not. You teach them they don't have to speak honestly because you'll decode their silence anyway. You teach them they don't have to consider your feelings because you'll cushion the blow yourself long before they ever see the damage. You become the emotional safety net for people who don't even notice they're falling on you. And the tragedy is, you do it with good intentions. You think you're holding things together. But what you're really doing is holding yourself hostage. Every time you accept crumbs and call it generosity, you shrink. Every time you chase someone who's indifferent, you erode your own dignity. Every time you let disrespect slide because you don't want to make things awkward, you sculpt a version of yourself who begs for space in the very life you're supposed to be living. That's the hidden cost of never setting prices. People will assume your value is whatever they can get away with. Humans respond to incentives. If kindness is rewarded with more demands, you will get more demands. If silence is rewarded with comfort, people will prefer your silence. If emotional labor is provided unconditionally, it becomes expected. What you call empathy, the world sometimes translates as availability. What you call patience, the world sometimes translates as permission. What you call generosity, the world sometimes translates as unlimited access. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Self-respect is not a feeling. It's a policy. It's a system of rules you live by, even when your emotions try to bargain them down. And those rules matter because they determine your price in every social market you enter. Relationships, friendships, workplaces, even family. When you undervalue yourself, the world adjusts accordingly. When you don't enforce your limits, people learn. Your limits don't exist. You don't get treated the way you deserve. You get treated the way you explain your value through your actions. And right now, whether you want to admit it or not, you've been selling yourself cheap, hoping someone will magically decide to pay full price. But no one pays more for something than the owner believes it's worth. You think the problem is that people don't appreciate you. But the deeper problem is that you've created incentives that reward them for not appreciating you. Human behavior, even in the softest emotional spaces, follows patterns like any marketplace. People lean toward what's easy, what's available, and what doesn't require effort. And without realizing it, you've engineered a system where others get maximum benefit at minimal cost. Look at the way you respond to disappointment. When someone cancels plans last minute, you brush it off with, "No worries." When someone forgets something important to you, you pretend it's fine. When someone consistently takes without offering anything back, you rationalize it with, "They're just going through something." You think you're giving grace. But from their perspective, you're signaling that your standards can be violated without consequence. This is how reciprocity breaks down. Not because people are inherently selfish, but because you've conditioned them, gently, unintentionally, repeatedly, to expect one-sided generosity. The emotional economy you operate in collapses not because value disappears, but because you refuse to charge for it. You refuse to require effort, honesty, time, or accountability. You give away emotional labor like a free sample booth at a grocery store, and you're surprised when people circle back for seconds without ever buying anything. This isn't moral judgment, it's structural analysis. Incentives shape behavior far more reliably than good intentions ever will. Think of workplace dynamics. The person who always says yes gets the additional tasks, not because they're the most capable, but because they're the least resistant. Think of friendships. The one who always accommodates ends up being the planner, the listener, the rescuer. Think of relationships. The partner who avoids conflict becomes the emotional shock absorber. None of this is about fairness. It's about predictable patterns. The incentives you create determine the treatment you receive. And when your incentive structure rewards thoughtlessness, inconsistency, or emotional laziness, those traits multiply. Humans aren't uniquely cruel, but they are uniquely adaptive. They adapt to the level of accountability required of them, and you require almost none. You protect them from the discomfort of consequences while absorbing the discomfort yourself. In effect, you subsidize their behavior with your own well-being. Here's the uncomfortable part. Every time you avoid setting a boundary, you're giving someone a discount on your humanity. You think you're being easygoing. Actually, you're teaching others they don't have to try. You think you're being supportive. Actually, you're shielding them from the responsibility of growth. You think you're being low maintenance. Actually, you're erasing your needs before anyone else gets a chance to see them. And people respond to that erasure. They step into the space you leave empty. They occupy the territory you refuse to claim. They follow the rules you quietly enforce. Rules that say your comfort is optional, your boundaries flexible, your needs negotiable. This is how learned helplessness forms, not just in yourself, but in the dynamic itself. You teach people that you will always be the one to adjust, to bend, to absorb the friction. They learn they don't need to put in effort because you've made yourself the default solution. But you're not a solution. You're a person. And the more you act like the solution, the less people see the person behind it. That's the psychological blind spot you create by overfunctioning, by doing too much, by stepping in before you're asked and staying long after you should have walked away. People stop noticing your effort, not because it's small, but because it's constant. They stop noticing your emotional labor because you never attach any cost to it. They stop noticing your exhaustion because you present it with a calm face and a steady tone. You teach them that your limit is infinity, and they believe you. But here's the truth you keep avoiding. People rise to the standards you enforce, not the ones you silently wish for. If your treatment feels unfair, it's not because others fail to recognize your value. It's because you keep undermining your own value through the incentives you create. And until you change the system will keep running exactly as you designed it. Loss aversion isn't just an economic principle. It's a psychological trap that turns your life into a negotiation you keep losing. You cling to relationships, habits, and dynamics, not because they nourish you, but because the idea of losing them feels worse than the pain of keeping them. You stay in one-sided friendships because you fear emptiness more than imbalanced intimacy. You tolerate inconsistency because instability feels safer than isolation. You let people take advantage because the discomfort of confrontation feels more threatening than the discomfort of being undervalued. You tell yourself you're avoiding conflict, but what you're really avoiding is your own reflection, the version of you that knows you're settling. So you shrink, soften, and silence yourself, hoping the world will reward your self-sacrifice with fairness. But loss aversion doesn't protect you. It traps you in sunk-cost relationships where you pour emotional energy into empty wells. You convince yourself that leaving would make everything you've invested meaningless. But staying makes everything you're losing invisible. You're not protecting anything. You're leaking. And the longer you leak, the more you distort your internal compass. You start confusing tolerance with resilience. You confuse indulgence with compassion. You confuse emotional numbness with maturity. You become so used to carrying other people's weight that your own needs feel like an inconvenience. You apologize for wanting the bare minimum. You hesitate before expressing discomfort, as if pain requires permission. This is how you take yourself for granted, quietly, consistently, habitually. You know boundaries would stabilize your life. You know clarity would simplify your relationships. But boundaries feel like cliffs, and you're afraid of falling off. So you hold everyone close, even those who drain you, because distance feels like danger. You treat your well-being as collateral damage, as if your exhaustion is a fair price for keeping the peace. But here's the paradox. The more you avoid asserting your needs, the more you lose the very connection you're trying to preserve. People don't become closer to you when you erase your boundaries. They drift into the space where your identity used to be. You become a placeholder in your own story. That's the final consequence of taking yourself for granted. You stop being a participant, and you become a utility, a convenience, an accessory to other people's comfort. Every time you silence your needs, you reinforce the belief that your needs don't matter. Every time you stay passive, you confirm the illusion that you're fine. Every time you choose toleration over honesty, you cut off another piece of your emotional depth. Eventually, people believe you don't require anything because you've spent years acting like you don't. This is reciprocity breakdown at its purest. When your effort has no return, not because others are incapable of giving, but because they assume you don't need anything back. Humans aren't mind readers. They respond to signals. And your signals say, I'll stay even if you don't try. I'll help even if you don't care. I'll be here even if it hurts. And in a world full of competing incentives, people choose the path of least resistance. Here's what you need to understand. You're not weak because you care. You're not flawed because you give. The issue isn't your kindness. It's that your kindness has no structure. Without boundaries, kindness becomes martyrdom. Without self-respect, generosity becomes servitude. Without standards, loyalty becomes self-erasure. You don't need to become colder. You need to become clearer. You don't need to stop giving. You need to stop giving blindly. You don't need to stop caring. You need to stop caring alone. And the moment you decide that your well-being is not a negotiation, everything changes. Loss aversion fades. Learned helplessness dissolves. Reciprocity returns. People either rise to meet you or fall away. Both outcomes liberate you. Because the truth is simple. You were never afraid of losing people. You were afraid of choosing yourself. But choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's sustainable. It's sane. It's the foundation of every healthy relationship you will ever have. And the day you stop taking yourself for granted is the day the world finally learns how to treat you better. You've spent so much of your life believing that the world was mistreating you, overlooking you, undervaluing you. But the deeper truth is quieter and harder to swallow. You were the one repeatedly stepping out of your own way, lowering the bar, softening your voice, and offering discounts on parts of yourself that should have never been negotiable. You kept hoping someone would notice your effort and repay it, but emotional economics doesn't reward silent sacrifices. This isn't a call to become harsh, guarded, or suspicious. It's an invitation to return to yourself, to remember that your presence has weight, and your needs aren't disruptions. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors with locks. They don't shut people out. They teach people how to enter with respect. As you sit here now, let the noise fade. Let your mind unclench. Let the idea settle that you don't have to earn the right to be treated well. You don't need permission to take up space in your own life. You don't need to apologize for protecting your energy. You belong to yourself first. And that isn't selfish. It's the blueprint for a life where connection feels mutual, where effort is shared, and where your value no longer depends on how much you endure.